Keith Ferrazzi has ideas that can help us in pharma open doors and serve differently. He has been named a global leader of tomorrow by the World Economic Forum, one of the top 40 under 40 business leaders by Crane's Business, and one of the most creative Americans in Who's Really Who. He has been published in the Wall Street Journal, Harvard Business Review, Fortune, Forbes, Inc., and Fast Company. His #1 New York Times best-selling books, Never Eat Alone and Who's Got Your Back, propelled him into the spotlight by redefining relationship growth. He is now considered the world's foremost expert in professional relationship development. Both Forbes and Inc. have called him one of the world's most connected individuals. We had the pleasure of sitting down with Keith before he spoke at the Art of Sales conference in Toronto to ask how his ideas apply to our world in pharma sales and marketing. Here's what he had to say. So thanks, Keith, for taking some time to sit down and chat with us.
That's my pleasure, Jill. Thank you.
As we talked about, we're on a bit of a mission to lift pharma, to help them realize that they can be patient-focused and increase sales at the same time. And in fact, we're trying to empower customer-facing pharma people with the knowledge, skills, habits, and attitudes so that they can contribute to better healthcare outcomes and better sales for their company at the same time.
And by the way, with the work that I've done at Pharma, I would imagine that that's probably easier than you might have thought, and I'll tell you why. Because one of the things we learn about changing human behavior in the workplace is you have to engineer to gravity, meaning you can't engineer against human nature. But I promise you that the people who got involved in pharma at the early stages, they got involved because they wanted to help.
Yes.
They got involved because they believed in the causes. They got involved because they wanted to bring wellness. And all you're doing is you're helping them see their way, probably back to their original intent. So I call that engineering to gravity.
Awesome, and that's exactly what I find when I'm speaking to audiences. It's almost like someone said, it's like releasing the hounds, and people are like, yes, we can finally get back to focusing on the patient, because they've been so focused on the script. And one of the challenges is that the senior leaders, I think they're afraid that if they take their mind off, their eye off the script, that they won't be able to make their numbers.
No.
What are your
Well, look, I mean, I don't know the economics of the business as well as you do, of course, but I can tell you that every business that I've ever worked with, from the largest automotive companies in the world to the largest pharma companies in the world to chemical companies to retail and others, what I can tell you is if you focus on the customer and the product, that the economics catches up. It really does. And focusing on delivering, I always say that the greatest aspiration we should have is to be as generous as possible to our targeted customer base. And once you do that, then it is quite amazing how the shareholder value follows.
Yeah, and we seem to be we are definitely in a movement toward patient centricity.
Yeah. Let me pause for a second. There's this wonderful debate between shareholder value, customer focus, employee focus, and broader community stakeholders, right? And take a look at that. How do you fit the focus on the employees? Because I would think that a conduit to focusing on customer has to be focus on employees first. Because focus on employees first, obviously, people are good people. They will inevitably focus on customer. But if they're being squeezed, if they're being tortured, if they're being pushed so hard and mandated internally, they don't have the opportunity to serve.
That's right.
But you've got to unleash them internally to ultimately, in fact, one of the things we always say, as you well know, there's this big shift occurring in selling today in pharmaceutical, from the doctor-centric sales to system-centric sales. The Kaiser Permanentes of the world, et cetera. And they're buying very similar to how they're buying very similar to how the big B2B companies have had to sell for a long time. And we've been measuring and monitoring the practices of high return strategic account management for 20 years now. And what I can say is that there's two real things to think about: elevate and collaborate internally and externally. And what I find is that you got to focus on the internal elevation and collaboration first. The reps or whoever's managing the key strategic accounts, they have to know how to effectively bond and create solutions internally in order to deliver the robust solutions externally. It's an internal exercise first.
And what advice do you have for them then? Because we've gone from a position of dictating to the reps, this is what you say exactly, and there's some fear of letting go of that. So how do we start to change that?
Well, what you'll find is that with an increasing need to do solution selling, an increased need for creativity crops up. So like you said, you're moving, when we think about culture change, we believe that organizations don't change culture, just people change behaviors, right? So the question is, what behaviors are you trying to change among which constituencies? So the intention here would be to say, if it's the strategic account manager is the individual we're focused on, and the old level behavior, we call it the X behavior, was to push a script, and the new level behavior is to come up with patient-based solutions for efficacy. I'm making this up, I don't know your business. Then what are the specific practices that will allow that to occur? Probably one of the things you need to do with that individual is practice the dialogue and practice the solution before you walk in. So, and I would imagine the solution is no longer going to be just a script, but it's going to be wrapped in a number of different complementary elements of the solution. So pulling all of those together and practicing for that internally. So that's the internal collaboration that's necessary before you're capable of going out and doing the external collaboration. All human behavior change in corporations and culture have to be broken down into the X to Y to P. Old behavior to new behavior, and what's the emblematic practice. And then that practice needs to be practiced until it becomes a habit and a ritual, and then it becomes a culture. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's great. One of the challenges that we have in our effort to try to be part of the PIT crew to help the healthcare professional in the treatment of patients is that trust in us is at an all-time low. So, and I know...
Trust in who?
Trust in the customer-facing pharma person. Let's start there. Trust in the industry, trust in the whole organization, but let's just look
Trust in pharma, you're saying, is at all-time low.
So
okay.
As a customer-facing person, whether I'm a key account manager or a rep or a medical science liaison, the trust in me, because I represent pharma, is not there.
So we call that a -1 relationship. If in fact it's true that you're walking in the door with prejudice aimed at you, it's a -1 relationship. And to move from a -1 relationship to a positive relationship, you've got to pass through some form of a candor or transparency or a mea culpa. You've got to call it out, right? If you don't call it out, it's always going to be present in the subliminal conversation. And to say, listen, there's no reason that you should trust me until I prove to you otherwise. And just say that out loud and just say, I can understand that you might have imagined somebody coming in here in my position would really just be trying to maximize the number of scripts that you're going to write. And let me explain to you why that's actually not even our good business model any longer. It used to be that, but today it's really more solution selling, because what's more important to us is the long-term relationship, so that you trust us when we introduce new scripts that we're not going to just be shoving through for volume. So I know, once again, I'm making this up because it's just an hypothesis. I'm not quite making up. We've done a good bit of work in the pharma space, but not me personally. My team has. So to go from a -1 to a positive relationship, you've got to bring up the transparency. The other thing you've got to do is you've got to double down on the generosity. What are you bringing to the table? What are you bringing to the table? And then in terms of the relational side, you've got to double down on the authenticity. You've got to double down on the vulnerability. To say to somebody, I understand, why you might feel that way, and particularly, somebody like yourself who has a history of a parental death associated with, an inappropriate use of the script. You've got to bond to the person on an emotional and empathetic level, and that has to do with some degree of vulnerability. I don't think most people think of the art of selling as being an art of vulnerability, but it is. It's empathy and vulnerability.
It's interesting you say that, because we're trying to teach them to connect with their why. Why did you get into pharma in the first place, when you were alluding to earlier?
Exactly.
And it's hard to get them to go there, to go to really what was it. And I think once they communicate that opens, like you said,
well, it opens what we call it's called porosity. Before you change another human's behavior, you've got to open their porousness, make them spongy, absorptive of the message. And so a leader trying to change the culture of a company has to open the porosity of the organization. So the porosity of the organization in that case is going to really be opened through the leader's vulnerability and the leader's emphatic nature that this is, and storytelling, etc.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So you talked in Never Eat Alone about the benefits of a long, slow dinner. Now, we don't have that available to us anymore.
Right.
Some of those strategies, they've closed that out. And it's too bad because society's afraid we're using our influence for wrong, whereas
Look, the long, slow dinner can be encapsulated in nothing more than this: an opportunity to open up the kimono, be authentic, be vulnerable, let people know who you really are, let people know what your real intentions are. And you can do that in a greeting.
Like you just described.
And perhaps you can, maybe you can model it better than I can, but it could be as simple as, what a pleasure to meet you. I've been really looking forward to this meeting. Frankly, I feel I've got a little bit of work to undo. And, that obviously gets me a little bit afraid because I'm not sure if you're going to hear me, but let me tell you why I hope you'll hear me.
Right. And why?
I mean, that exact phrasing is authentic, it's open, it's vulnerable, and I think it will open, it'll crack a little bit open. Yeah. And then you follow up with a robust, generous solution, and you open and ask the dialogue relative to that person's perspective.
Focusing on the best interest.
Look, your job is to build a relationship and to be of service. That's what your job is in sales, to build a relationship and be of service. That's what your job is in leadership, to build a relationship and be of service. And that's what it means to be a trusted advisor, which is what we teach in our strategic selling and also in leadership that we do as well.
Yeah, awesome. And for those leaders that are trying to create this cultural change, how do you help them? When there is a leader that gets it, that realizes, yes, when we stop talking about the script and start talking about the patient, are people more engaged?
Here's the question we make all leaders ask in thinking about culture change. Yeah. Because changing cultures just change behaviors, and because changing behaviors is tough, change as few behaviors as possible to get the job done, right? So strategically in the coming year, what do you got to get done? Only focus on the behaviors that will help you to accelerate getting that done. Nice. Which constituencies need to change which behaviors? Okay. And the first constituency you've got to put on the table is you. Literally as a human, as an individual, not just the leadership team. But what do you need to do differently that will show the organization that you are willing to change your behaviors? Right. And that's where sometimes coaching comes into play, where we work with the leaders to tell their story about how they humbly need to make a change in themselves in order to gain permission for the organization to make their changes themselves.
And then empower you.
And that's that porosity piece, opening that porosity.
Yeah, great, beautiful. So Keith, the Challenger Sale is popular right now in pharma circles, teaching that it's not the relationship rep, it's the Challenger rep that wins. Can you comment on that?
I think that was a publicity stunt that it's disappointing to me, because the ability to challenge effectively is built on the back of a relationship.
You have to have the relationship.
If I come in and interrogate you, I have no right to do that. And so the issue is not or.
Great.
And I believe their research showed that, but to get attention, I think they threw the word relationship under the bus, which is unfortunate. Right. It doesn't mean,
up and went, what?
But it doesn't mean that, look, I'm not talking about backslapping, old school, pandering kind of sales. I'm talking about genuine trust, genuine interest, genuine relationship, genuine authenticity. And then on the top of that, you add strong doses of generosity. And on top of that, you add candor and accountability, which is what the Challenger Sale is based on. But we've been saying that for years. Yeah. It's all four. It's intimacy and generosity gives you permission for the candor and accountability.
Yeah, I hear you. Exactly. Awesome. Yeah. Love that summary. We have so much to learn from you in our industry. Wow. Thank you so much for taking the time. How can we learn more from you?
Ferrazzi Greenlight is the company. My name is Keith Ferrazzi. I'm pretty easily found online. It doesn't take long to get a hold of my office. So Ferrazzi Greenlight is the company. Thanks for having me, and you're doing God's work, and I really hope that you get some great progress and that you're able to open up some porosity within these organizations.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.